Hello and welcome to our presentation on attachment and temperament theories. My name is Anna Lauren Flanagan and my group members are Kyosha Mazo and Emily Mumford. Today we will be discussing how these theories of temperament and attachment affect development in infancy and early childhood. To give a background about what we are about to discuss, let's go over some key terms. The first term, attachment, is the bond that takes place between an infant and their primary caregiver or caregivers. The critical period refers to the window of opportunity that a child and caregiver have to form a strong attachment. According to John Bowlby, this critical period takes place in the child's first 2 to 3 years of life. Secure base is a key term that takes place after attachment occurs. Secure base refers to the primary caregiver becoming a safe space for the child to draw on when anxious and upset. Reactive attachment disorder refers to developmentally inappropriate interactions that are present before a child turns 5, indicating unusual trust toward strangers. Key terms related to temperament are as follows. Temperament is the way an individual consistently responds behaviorally and emotionally to their environment. Goodness of fit refers to how well a child's temperament fits within their environment and how this fit can impact their temperament overall. There are 3 main temperaments discussed in our text. The easy child refers to children that generally display happy and positive moods and often adapt easily to their environment. The difficult child refers to children who tend to be fussy, cry often, and have challenges adapting to their environments. The slow to warm up child refers to children who often show low levels of activity and emotion and tend to be somewhat negative. John Bowlby was a British psychologist whose early studies of attachment relations between infants and their caregivers gave way to what we now know as attachment theory. With a background in Freud's psychoanalysis, Bowlby explored the areas regarding attachment behaviors in children and how they responded to their caregivers. Bowlby was particularly interested in Konrad Lorenz's imprinting of geese study completed in the 1930s. Lorenz was intrigued by the notion that imprinting was a natural instinct for the geese and happened in a definite time period after the geese were hatched. Bowlby applied some of the same thoughts to attachment in infancy. He carried over some of this thinking to his thieves study conducted at the clinic where he worked. He hypothesized that maternal deprivation during the early years of life of some 44 juvenile delinquents played a factor in their emotional development. Of the boys who had experienced maternal loss and deprivation, a clear majority of them showed what Bowlby termed affectionless psychopathy. Harry Harlow was also studying attachment during this time period by using rhesus monkeys raised either in isolation or with 2 wire surrogates, one equipped with the ability for the monkeys to receive milk and the other covered in soft cloth. Although there were some unethical issues of the Harlow study, there were some research findings which showed attachment was related to more than just food and survival. There was an emotional component. Bowlby developed the following terms for explaining the characteristics of attachment. Safe haven refers to the primary caregiver being the source of stability and comfort. The caregiver is responsive to the infant's needs and offers protection when the baby feels distressed or threatened. The secure base is when the caregiver has given the infant a secure and reliable foundation upon which to build as they begin to explore. When the child feels comfortable enough to be away from the caregiver from time to time, but also comes back to the caregiver when they may need comfort or when a stressful event arises, is known as proximity maintenance. Finally, separation distress simply means that the child becomes unhappy and will likely cry when separated from the caregiver. These four characteristics give us a good view of what attachment looks like between child and caregiver and how it can impact the child's growth and development.
John Bowlby was a British psychologist, and he became extremely interested in child-mother separation during the bombing of London. The bombing of London, a lot of parents sent their kids to the safety of the countryside. And the kids were with safe people. They were well cared for. They were well fed. But they still had a very negative response to the separation from their mothers. At that point, he looked at the biology that was emerging in primatology. A monkey infant gets almost all its nutrition in the first 2 or 3 months of life from its mother, from lactation. But the infant who's weaned still seeks proximity. You'll see the infant reach out and touch the mom's tail or touch its coat. There's a continuing lifelong desire for proximity and contact. And Bowlby and others have seen that proximity seeking and that contact seeking as being cornerstones of what they call attachment behavior.
In the first part of the 20th century, behaviorists and psychoanalysts claimed that babies love their parents because you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. The innovation of Bowlby was to observe that that can't be all, that what the child needs is not only to be fed, but also to be held by an understanding, sensitive, and responsive adult, and that optimal social and mental health outcomes will follow from that. And 60 or more years on now, we have a half-century of evidence showing that he was more or less right.
Our program at the Center for Babies, Toddlers, and Families is really based on the theories of John Bowlby, with the idea that we really need to help parents and children form a secure attachment. So oftentimes, families are referred to us when the parents have had very difficult childhoods themselves and are really struggling in this role of being a parent.
Like I said, I never had a mommy. I was never taught how to take care of anybody or myself, so it was like very hard. Like I wouldn't have patience, like the crying, like I would, scream at her and stuff like that, And
For many parents who really were neglected as children, hearing a baby cry triggers in them their own feelings of that unrelenting crying that they did. So for Pearl, it was very, very difficult for her to be able to meet her child's needs.
Push it, push this button. Yeah, hard, push it.
We've partnered with the Center for Attachment Research at the new school for a series of attachment measures to test that our intervention is effective.
So come on in, Pearl. That's going to be your chair. So just put her down and let her have a go at whatever she wants to do in here. Okay? We measure the attachment relationship with a laboratory scenario that takes 20 minutes. The critical point is where the mother gets a cue to leave the room.
Bye, baby girl. Sit lay down.
Some children look on the outside like they're very independent and seem not to notice, but physiologically are very aroused and stay aroused even in the presence of when that caregiver returns. By contrast, the securely attached child often notices, cries when the caregiver leaves, and when the caregiver comes back, easily turns to the caregiver and looks to the caregiver to be comforted, and then they can get back to some kind of homeostasis.
Okay, you play with them.
We think this response is one of the hallmarks of mental health.
No.
What is so interesting about childhood development is that we know a lot about the long-term, lifelong consequences of early life adversity, ranging from psychological effects like substance abuse and depression, but also biological consequences like increased incidence of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and a whole host of other physical ailments.
Bowlby also said there was a critical period in which children could develop a healthy attachment to their caregivers. Through his research and studies, Bowlby developed 4 main stages of attachment: pre-attachment from newborns to 6 to 12 weeks, attachment in the making from 6 to 12 weeks to 6 to 8 months, and clear-cut attachment from 6 to 8 months to 2 years. During this last period, Bowlby also categorized the formation of reciprocal relationships between caregiver and child. Overall, Bowlby said these attachment stages created an internal working model of security from which the child could grow, explore, and develop. While there were many theorists studying the idea of attachment in infants and children, it was Mary Ainsworth, a Canadian psychologist, who provided us with one of the most widely regarded bodies of research having to do with attachment. Ainsworth moved to London with her husband in the 1950s and began work at the Tavistock Clinic, where John Bowlby was also working and conducting research. This began the collaboration between Ainsworth and Bowlby that later defined and added to the most widely used theories regarding attachment. Based on her 1967 Ugandan study, where she studied mothers and children in their natural environment, Ainsworth concluded that there were patterns of attachment directly related to the relationships between mother and infant and how the mother responded to the infant's needs. From this research, Ainsworth sought to understand more about the attachment bond between caregiver and child and how this attachment could be measured. It was then that Ainsworth developed the strange situation assessment. Through this method, Ainsworth and her colleagues tested their theory about the quality of the relationship between child and caregiver. The strange situation test was used to gauge how securely the infant was attached to the caregiver when presented with a stressful situation, such as the caregiver leaving the room or the presence of a stranger. An example of this assessment was seen previously in the video clip. From this research, Ainsworth could categorize 4 distinct levels of attachment: secure attachment, insecure avoidant attachment, insecure resistant attachment, and insecure disorganized attachment. We will delve more into the different attachment styles in just a few minutes. But first, it is important to understand how and why attachment is such an important aspect of child development. Many researchers and theorists believe that attachment is the basis for healthy development over the lifespan. When issues with attachment arise during this time of infancy and early childhood development, problems may be seen later in life with emotional regulation, social interactions, and the building of relationships, and even with cognitive development. Now let's discuss what these theories mean in terms of development. Attachment is a theory that is typically used regarding infants. This is because the relationship between an infant and its caregivers has the most impact on development. During this stage of development, attachment style affects how an infant reacts to its mother, how an infant reacts to its environment, how an infant responds to general unfamiliarity, like new situations and new people, and innate responses already present in an infant's behavior. These include things like the child's instinct to cry to alert a caregiver of their needs. Different types of attachment have different effects on infant behavior. For example, securely attached infants explore environments freely, with their mothers serving as a safe space if they feel unsafe or uncertain. They are inquisitive but cautious when necessary. Insecure avoidant attachment results in distant, aloof behavior. These infants interact very little with their mothers, despite showing signs of distress when the mothers leave. Insecure resistant attachment results in clingy behavior, along with outright disinterest in exploring. However, these infants will also reject attempts to be comforted by their caregivers. These mixed signals can sometimes confuse new parents. Insecure disorganized attachment manifests as confusion and fear that is apparent in the infant's behavior. They can appear resistant, anxious, or even afraid of their caregiver. Reactive attachment disorder is rarer than the others discussed here and only represents the most severe attachment problems. Infants in this category display behavior that may be inappropriate for their developmental stage, such as an unusual amount of trust in strangers. These infants can also display ambivalence toward their caregivers. This form of attachment can result from a traumatic experience or abuse early on in a child's life. Attachment theory can be used to assess whether the relationship between a child and its caretaker is developing properly, and to determine what might be done to strive for the relationship that would be healthiest for both the caretaker and the child. Some researchers use Ainsworth's style of attachment to determine a child's later development and social patterns. And some supporting research suggests that attachment style can explain adolescent behavior. Attachment style can also point to other factors that may be negatively affecting child development, such as poverty, abuse, or neglect. Another theory affecting development in infancy and early childhood had to do with the infant's temperament, which was studied by Stella Chess and Alexander Thomas. Chess and Thomas in 1956 began a longitudinal study to look at temperament in children. Chess and Thomas followed 133 children in New York from 3 months of age into adulthood to observe how temperament could affect development and relationships throughout life. From these observations, based on the 9 dimensions of temperament they observed, Chess and Thomas concluded that children could display 3 types of temperament: the easy child, the difficult child, and the slow to warm up child. The 9 dimensions Chess and Thomas used to characterize temperament are as follows. Sensory threshold is the level of stimulation needed to evoke a response in the child. Activity level refers to the general motor activity level during wakefulness and sleep. Intensity is how expressive a child is, whether acting out of happiness, anger, sadness, or other emotions. Rhythmicity is how predictable bodily functions are, for example, appetite, elimination, and sleep cycles. Continuing with the 9 dimensions of temperament, Chess and Thomas also looked at adaptability, or how easily a child adjusted to change or transition. The child's mood describes the child's basic disposition, whether they were happy, serious. Approach or withdrawal, how well a child reacts to new places or situations. Persistence, how well a child handles obstacles. And finally, distractibility, how easily a child can be distracted or can concentrate. From these dimensions, Chess and Thomas developed the 3 main temperament styles listed earlier. Temperament, unlike attachment, is present at birth. As defined by the textbook, it is the consistent ways in which we respond behaviorally and emotionally to our environment. These are traits that are present throughout life and are shaped by events and experiences. However, the concept is similar to attachment theory in that it can affect many of the same aspects of infant development, such as how they react to their mothers, how they react to environments, how they respond to general unfamiliarity. Not mentioned are the child's innate behaviors. That's because, in many situations, the child's temperament is the group of innate behaviors. They are the responses that come naturally to each child. Much like attachment, there are different categories of temperament as outlined by Chess and Thomas, and they affect behavior differently. Easy children, for example, typically display positive signs and are in a good mood. They adapt to changes in environment easily, hence the name. Difficult children, on the other hand, do not react well to changes in their environment and often cry. They are usually moody, which may put strain on themselves and their caretakers. This is not necessarily the fault of the caretaker or the child. Slow to warm up children, meanwhile, show subdued emotion. They aren't overtly adaptive and can display negative emotions. But in general, these children aren't very active. Again, this is not necessarily either party's fault. Temperament theory can be used to predict how a child will respond to certain actions and environments. In doing so, caretakers can strive to create an environment in which their child can be comfortable in, which in turn can reduce stress on the caretaker and the child. Pinpointing a child's temperament can also help parents better react to their child's behavior and adapt to their child's needs. How do these theories combine to affect child development? While attachment and temperament are not one and the same, the implications for a child having a secure attachment with their caregiver may be related to the child's temperament. Parenting can be made more difficult if the child has a difficult or slow to warm temperament, which can affect the attachment between the child and caregiver. Also, parents who have had their own negative experiences in childhood may find it difficult to respond appropriately to the child's needs if they show signs of having a difficult or slow to warm temperament. Understanding a child's temperament can greatly affect how the parent responds to the child, tailoring their responsiveness and their interactions to benefit the child when they are stressed or fussy. Parents can manipulate the child's environment to better facilitate the attachment process by providing warm, caring, and empathetic responses to their child's needs, whatever the child's temperament may be. Attachment and temperament can play a significant role in how a person develops over the course of their life, and how that development process can affect such things as their social interactions, the ability to make sound decisions, their predisposition to adversity later in life, and their ability to build and maintain relationships. Having a secure attachment from childhood offers that person a better chance to develop normally and be able to function well. Children who experience neglect from their caregivers or who do not develop a stable and secure attachment to their caregivers early in life have trouble developing normally in the areas of language, emotional response, cognitive processing, and acquiring of social skills. These deficits can show up in a person's behavior over time and can negatively affect their lives as they develop. As we have learned from the previous slides, attachment and temperament factor in greatly to a child's developmental process. Providing a secure attachment for a child to grow and develop in will hopefully garner the best outcomes later in life for that child. Viewing attachment and temperament from the person and environment perspective gives us the ability to see how changes in the environment can affect the child's attachment to the caregiver, and likewise, how the parent or caregiver will respond to the child based on the child's temperament style. Understanding and being culturally aware of these processes as social workers will help to provide appropriate interventions when working with children and families to provide support and facilitate growth. While some theories and research regarding attachment and temperament show inconclusive results surrounding the consequences of these issues later in life, it is best practices overall to look at different theories and concepts to achieve a better understanding for which interventions might work best for different clients and families. As you continue to explore attachment and temperament in regards to infant and child development, it might be interesting to consider the following two questions. How might these theories be helpful to social workers when working with children and families? What perspectives should you use? And in what ways might these theories be criticized, if any? Thank you for joining us as we explored attachment and temperament theories and how they relate to development in early childhood and infancy.